So many of you wonder how much you can actually make from a typical DTF order. So in today's video, I'm gonna break that down step by step. Stick around to find out. So the purpose of this video is to really answer the question of how much profit you can actually make from a bulk order using DTF printing or direct-to-film printing. So to start off, for those of you that don't know what DTF printing is, it stands for direct-to-film printing, and the process goes as follows. You print your design onto rolls of film using a DTF printer, then the film goes through a powder shaker where then it adds the adhesive powder to the back of the design, then it goes through an oven so that it heats and melts that powder so that it can form the adhesive on the back of the design, and then the rolls come out of the oven as ready-made designs that you can then heat transfer onto different substrates. All right, so the next couple of sections are going to be pretty calculation and math intensive, so we'll be putting up a lot of these numbers on the screen so that you guys can follow along. So first of all, we're gonna be breaking down the ink cost that it'll take to print 100 t-shirts using DTF. So for DTF printing, you're gonna be looking at using CMYK and white ink. For a typical 1 liter bottle of white ink, you're gonna be looking at around $100. For a typical 1 liter bottle of color ink, you're gonna be looking at around $80. So on average, when you average the two between white and color, you're looking at about $90 per liter of ink. So for this particular example of t-shirts that we're printing for our event, we've calculated that we're using, on average, about 2 milliliters of ink per t-shirt. When you multiply 2 milliliters of ink by 100 shirts total, you're looking at about 200 milliliters of ink used for this order. Lastly, you simply multiply the 200 milliliters of ink that you've used for these 100 shirts times the cost per milliliter of 9 cents to arrive at about $18 for the ink that will cost you for this 100 shirts. All right, now that we know the cost of ink that'll go into making these 100 t-shirts, we also need to calculate the cost of the powder. Remember what I told you about DTF powder? It is used as an adhesive on the back of the design, so you do need to take into account that supply cost in your overall calculation. So for a kilogram of DTF powder, it costs about $40. And when you break that down onto a per gram basis, it's about 4 cents per gram. For this particular design that we're doing for our event, we estimate about 2 grams are being used per t-shirt in terms of powder. So over the course of 100 t-shirts for this particular order, you're using about 200 grams of DTF powder, which when multiplied by your 4 cents per gram cost, you're looking at about $8 in total for the powder cost for this particular order. Next, we also need to calculate the cost of our film rolls that we're using to print the designs onto. For a roll of DTF film that's about 328 feet in length, it costs about $220. For this particular order, for our designs, they're about 14 inches in height, and we pieced them together onto gang sheets side by side to fit them onto the film. It ended up using about 116 feet of film in total. So roughly just slightly over a third of the total roll of film. So if you multiply the 116 feet of film that we used for this order by the 67 cents per linear foot of DTF film that it costs, you'll end up about $78 for total film cost for this order. All right, so if you've been following along on the screen, I know it's a lot of math and a lot of numbers, but essentially per t-shirt, you're looking at ink, powder, and film only costs for about $1.04. If you add on the blank cost of the t-shirt, you're looking at $5.03 per t-shirt in your total cost of materials. As always, multiply that by your number of t-shirts, and in our case, it's 100. So my total cost for this particular order in terms of materials is $503. All right, so now that we talked about how the cost structure breaks down for your cost of materials in DTF printing, I'm gonna give you 3 different methods in which you can price what you're gonna be selling from your output. In this first example, we're gonna be talking about charging per gang roll. So what is a gang roll? A gang roll is basically you're selling the entire roll of printed designs to your customers. Now, after doing some research and digging online, we found that the cheapest gang roll that's about 22-inch wide by 240 inches long costs about $70. So if we take that example as the baseline of what you can sell a gang roll for, you're looking at about 29 cents per inch. So then if you reference back to the 116 foot of film that we use for our 100 t-shirt order, you're looking at about 29 cents per inch, as I mentioned, for a total of about $404 that you can sell that roll for. Now, if you remember what I told you about what it cost me to produce that roll, if I'm only selling the rolls and not the actual shirts, you're only gonna take into consideration the cost of the film, the cost of the ink, and the cost of the powder. So for an order of 100 t-shirts, my ink cost was $18. My powder cost was $8, and my film cost was $78, for a grand total of $104 for a 100 t-shirt order. If you can sell that roll for the $404 that I just referenced, you can make a profit of $300 just by selling the gang roll. If you want to calculate on a profit margin percentage basis, you're looking at about 74% on just spending the time to print the roll, package it up, and sell the entire roll to your customer. Now, the second way that you can monetize the roll that you just printed is to sell them as gang sheets. So gang sheets instead of gang rolls is when you cut up these individual sheets from the roll and you're selling sheets individually to your customers. Now, because of the work that is involved in actually cutting up these sheets and then selling them individually, you can imagine that it makes sense to be able to sell them for a higher price to the end user. Typically, a 22 by 24 inch gang sheet will cost about $7 to the end user. So if you're able to sell all 100 sheets at $7 per piece, maybe to one single customer or to many different customers, your revenue will be $700 for this order. So if you can sell 100 sheets at $7 a piece and it still costs you the same cost to make those 100 sheets, meaning the ink, powder, and film cost of $104 in total, now instead of making $300 in profit, you are selling them for $700 in revenue, minus your $104 in cost, you're making $596 for that same order by selling the sheets individually. This will drastically increase your profit margin to now 85% for that same order, simply because you took some extra time and cut them into individual sheets and sold them individually for a higher price. All right, last but not least, if you want to go the extra mile and you want to actually produce these t-shirts, which in our case is what we've done because we need these t-shirts for our staff for the event, then you can actually do the transfer onto the t-shirts from the film that's been printed. Now, if you go this route, you will incur some extra costs in terms of cost of materials, because not only do you need to take into consideration your ink, powder, and film costs, now you need to have blank t-shirts that you need to purchase to transfer those designs onto. So for 100 t-shirts, we spent about $400, plus the $104 that we spent in the material costs for ink, powder, and our film. It ends up being a total of $504 for the t-shirts and all the supplies. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. Because you're doing some extra work and you're actually transferring those designs onto t-shirts, you've taken it all the way and have a finished product to sell to the customer. You're not only selling the transfer sheets or the gang rolls, you can now charge an even higher premium selling these individual shirts. So these typical DTF printed t-shirts can go for about $25 on average, and pretty conservatively in today's market. So $25 per shirt in terms of the price that you're selling it for, times 100 t-shirts equates to about $2,500 in revenue. Now, minus your $504 of cost that I just mentioned, you're looking at close to $2,000 of just profit on this particular order. That equates to a whopping profit margin of about 80%. Now, if you compare this profit margin of about 80% when you actually produce the final t-shirts versus the previous 85% in profit margin if you sell the individual gang sheets, you might be wondering, well, why would I do all that extra work of making the t-shirts if I'm gonna be making less in profit margin? Well, the answer is this. While you might make a little bit less in profit margin in terms of the percentage, you're making significantly more in terms of the overall aggregate dollar amount of profit. So instead of making a little under $600 of profit in the previous example selling individual gang sheets, you're making close to $2,000 of profit by selling these individual t-shirts, even though you incur a little bit extra cost of materials for the blanks. So I hope from this explanation and this detailed breakdown of the cost analysis and profit potential of a typical bulk DTF order, you can see the benefits of what DTF can offer. In fact, DTF has been really gaining popularity in recent years because of its ease of use, especially versus traditional screen printing processes. A lot of traditional screen printers are actually changing over or replacing screen printing with DTF printing because of its added benefits and versatility. As some of you might know, traditional screen printing processes can be quite cumbersome and can involve a lot of setup processes to even get an order done. Especially for a multicolor design and a full color vibrant design and one with gradients, DTF is able to do that very easily, but with screen printing, you have to burn individual screens per color. So it's not very conducive for these multicolor designs and can get quite costly and time consuming to be able to burn all of those screens for that particular order.